Hello, and welcome back to the Punt Intended podcast, a Dynasty fantasy basketball podcast and a sports ethos production presented by FanDuel. On today's episode, we're going to continue our Division Dynasty Outlook series by moving to the Western Conference and starting with the Northwest Division. Will any players on the Utah Jazz provide hope that they're ready to emerge from their rebuild stage? Does anything shift in the Nuggets pecking order? Or do we just expect more of the same from the veterans there? Will the Blazers find any signs of life on the offensive side of the basketball? Or will they just continue to be this pesky defensive team who bogs down in the offensive side of the court? And are the Thunder and the Wolves pretty much the same without little changes except on the fringes of their roster? We'll address all those questions and more on this podcast. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. You can find me on Blue Sky at Mark C Sports Ethos and on Twitter at MacAttack145. My Dynasty writings and rankings can be found at sportsethos.com with an NBA Fantasy Pass subscription. And if you are out there counting, you probably are thinking, Mark, we still got 2 more divisions to go, and the NBA regular season starts tomorrow night. And yes, that is true. And you would think an Outlook series should end before the season starts. But given Dynasty, given that I don't want to make any sweeping conclusions really even 2 weeks into the season, we are going to continue the last 2 division Dynasty Outlook series. Those 2 pods will go a little bit into the season. Of course, we will hit on some major takeaways from the games that we have seen so far before getting into each of those teams. But we'll going to give an outlook on the 10 other teams that we haven't gotten to yet. So it'll be a mix of outlook plus what we've seen so far to date. So just giving you an outlook and a preview of what's to come. But with that said, let's get into today's podcast. And of course, we'll start with the Utah Jazz. We'll go ahead, pull up their depth chart here once again using courtdepth.com to kind of give you an idea of the players and their current hierarchy within the rotations. And, I did say we are presenting this over here on YouTube. So make sure if you're watching, go and hit that thumbs up button, comment on whatever questions you have. If you're listening on audio, please subscribe to the podcast and rate and review if you're up for it. That sort of stuff really does help the growth of the podcast. It would be very much appreciated. But yeah, let's jump right into the Utah Jazz. And at the top of the podcast, I said, are they going to provide any signs of life this season and show that they're ready to emerge from their time in the wilderness in this rebuild here? Of course, if that's going to happen, you're going to look at Lauri Markkanen to continue being that solid, fringe all-star player that we've seen that he can be. Frankly, he played at an all-star level previously. Now, I'm a little mixed if he will return to that peak. And it's not just questions on the state of the Jazz roster and if players are going to set him up, or if he's just maybe leaving his prime right now. We saw Lauri Markkanen miss a lot of games last season. Obviously, some of those were tanking reasons. But some of those were to back injuries as well. And back injuries scare me a little bit as something that could persist a little bit throughout his career and maybe just hinders play a little bit. And I think last season, it wasn't just Lauri Markkanen having a down season. I think there were legitimate injuries that affected his play. Now, his play at Eurobasket over the summer did quell a decent amount of my concerns. If it didn't quell my concerns that the back injuries were a factor in his play last season. It did quell my concerns if the back injuries are a long-term thing. I'm still a little unsure if Markkanen will return to that peak form, but there is some cause for hope here. And maybe a little bit of a buy low if you're willing to bet on Markkanen's games played and the talent level coming back. Walker Kessler is really the only other established player on this roster. And for me, Walker Kessler is one of the premier defensive drop bigs in the game. do not be concerned that, oh, there's no contract extension. Do the Jazz actually value him? Does the league actually value him? Because there are cap reasons why that it's better to leave Kessler on that rookie contract. Don't sign that extension yet and wait to the offseason. It is purely a cap reason play as to why Kessler does not have an extension yet. I very suspect at this point next season that he will be on I would say at least a $25 million per year contract, because Kessler is that good within his role. Now that role may be just limited to field goal percentage help, blocks, and rebounds. But maybe not. I mean, maybe Kessler expands his offensive game just a little bit, adds a little bit of passing just to flesh out his stat set and impact a little more. But even if he doesn't, I think he is a locked-in NBA starter for the long term, and you should treat him as such, and that's the production you will get from Walker Kessler. Keeping within the center rotation here, I mean, Yusuf Nurkic, Kevin Love, okay, maybe they play a little bit, but they're just bad options that we probably don't care too much about Dynasty and their long-term impact. Who we do care about here is Kyle Filipowski, who I was pretty high on entering the 2024 draft as one of those players who has just enough defense, just enough shooting, just enough size, just enough dribbling to be able to tick a lot of boxes for a player that I guess, a forward or just a player that you want playing on the court. And I think as we saw his minutes increase last season, we saw all of those elements come into play. And we've already seen that he can chip in nicely across the board. Now it's a matter of, can he solidify that rotation role? And can he expand upon the game anymore to be more of a mainstay instead of more of the curiosity he was last season? We'll have to see if Filipowski takes that next step forward, but he is definitely an intriguing one to watch here in Utah to see if he can further his game and take that extra step. Moving to the guard situation, it is very fascinating to see how this is going to play out. And personally, so I'm invested in it because it does contain one of my favorites from this, I guess another one of my favorites from the 2024 draft cycle in Isaiah Collier. In Collier's rookie season, we saw, I think, exactly why he was a polarizing prospect, but why I loved him so much, but also warned that he is this high risk, high reward option for fantasy and dynasty. We saw the playmaking and the downhill driving ability. And that's something that you just can't really teach all that often. He has that athleticism and has that drive to get into the paint and find and locate passes. The other side of the coin is that Collier will make a lot of turnover-worthy passes, cough the ball up, and the shooting is not there at all. And what was really disappointing for me from Collier's rookie season was not just the turnovers, but it was also the fact that, it wasn't the turnovers. It wasn't just the shooting accuracy. It's that Collier looked almost scared to take threes when the defense would sack off of him. And you got to at least be willing to take these shots if they're going to be giving you that much space on them. I think Collier has a chance to show that he's developed further in his game with this pretty wide open backcourt, but he does have to take pretty significant strides for that passing and shooting to really come into play here. I still like him, but his shooting and turnovers were at a lower point than I expected, even this early in his career. Of course, some may look at Keontae George as the answer to the Jazz guard question mark. I think Keontae George has been judged a little too harshly in terms of being not the guy, in the sense that his shot diet has actually been insanely tough his first two seasons. And factoring that in, Keontae George has actually shot very well relative to his shot diet. But the problem there is that if you're not getting good shots, it's just hard to make a living. He's not necessarily getting to the rim all that often. He's taking a ton of pull-up jumpers and a ton of pull-up threes. And eventually that's just it's hard to be super efficient on that shot diet. I think he definitely has talent as a shot maker and is more of combo guard, impactful player off the bench eventually. I think that will be his role. But it would be nice to see him just get to better spots on the floor or add some passing to his game just to round out the game and make him less one dimensional of a player. I think the Jazz will give him a shot again, just to see if he can do more than just tough shot making. I'm not sold if he will show anything more than that, though. But really, given that I have pretty wide ranges on Isaiah Collier and Keontae George, I actually think Walter Clayton Jr. is the safest guard here in the Jazz backcourt. He was their recent draft selection at 16th, or no, 18th, 16 or 18th, I believe. Kind of that back end teens area of the draft. And he is a lights out shooter. You don't want to put in hard ink that Walter Clayton Jr. is just going to come into the league shooting like crazy good. But he took an insane amount of pull-up threes over his college career and sank them at impressive accuracies. So we see a player who is, I think, already shown that he can make a bunch of threes, willing to take a bunch of pull-up threes and make these with consistency and familiarity and great accuracy. And that is a very valuable skill for a guard to have, especially a smaller guard at that. Now, I don't think Clayton Jr. is the most instinctive playmaker, one of those players who will make the passes that are clearly there, but not much more than that. His defense is okay at his size. It's more miss than hit, but I don't think it's overly damaging. So this makes Clayton Jr., I think, a decently appealing dynasty player. Not the highest upside because you're probably not getting those assists. You're not going to get great steals. But in terms of just points and threes and getting those threes up, I think that does make him an intriguing long-term play here. And a guard Jazz room that clearly does not have anyone locked in. Of course, maybe Bryce Sensabaugh is that shooter. We saw the shooting percentage actually be pretty impressive last season, and it's carried over in some of this preseason play so far. And if he can be that knockdown of a shooter, it's going to give him a clear role, not just now, but in the future in the NBA. Now, his defense and his passing and everything else about his game, I have a ton of questions on. But the shooting has been better than we saw his rookie season, and that just gives you a place in the NBA. I'm not saying go invest heavily in Bryce Sensabaugh, but I do think he will solidify a little bit of a back-end roster, not even roster spot, back-end rotation spot. Of course, we got to talk about the major wing here on this player, and Ace Bailey, who has been pretty impressive in preseason. The way he's come off his screens, come across off ball actions, drove downhill, take one or two dribbles, make that pull-up shot or get to the basket, and just really impressive with that offensive versatility. And the hype bubble is getting pretty high on Ace Bailey. I mean, I even saw him go 2 in a rookie draft recently over Dylan Harper. And I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on that level of hype. Like Ace Bailey going 2 in rookie drafts is crazy to me. And it's not that I hate Ace Bailey. It's that I don't think his game is necessarily suited that well for fantasy and dynasty purposes. Yes, it is great that Coach Will Hardy is putting Ace Bailey in positions to succeed. But it is mainly in those off-ball movement actions, which provides a ton of value on the court and opening up the court, opening up spacing for other players. But in terms of driving up your own usage, driving up your playmation or your play creation duties on offense, and driving up your usage in on-ball reps, which is really the one factor you like to see for on-ball players, Ace Bailey hasn't shown that. And I think that was a problem that we saw in college, even in a more limited Rutgers offense that did not maximize him the way that the Jazz will. I like Ace Bailey for those off-ball actions. I think the Jazz will continue to utilize him excellently there. And you'll see Ace Bailey do very well in that role. And maybe I'm putting Ace Bailey too much in a box here, but I think for him to jump up more for Dynasty, he really needs to show skills that he just hasn't at any level yet to date. I do like I like his shooting. I like the potential for some scoring in that mold. And I like his off-ball defense for so maybe you get some blocks and steals in that regard. I don't see a player who is going to be a massive usage hog and really rack up points and assists in that manner, though. So I'm going to pump the brakes a little bit on Ace Bailey hype. Going down the rest of the forward rotation, I mean, we have to look at Taylor Hendricks too, who was probably a little forgotten about after missing most of the season last year. But I think it's just, I guess, going somewhat against the idea of Ace Bailey. I think Taylor Hendricks is just a player who does a lot of little things well that will contribute nicely to winning impactful basketball. Kind of in that Aaron Naismith mold a little bit, where you look at the box scores for Naismith and they never look overly impressive. But Aaron Naismith is just a solid NBA starter because he adds shooting. He adds hard-nosed defense. He knows where to be, fulfills his role, and then some. And I think Taylor Hendricks is going to be more in that mold of player. He's not going to pop out on box scores, and I very rarely expect him to do that this season. But a player that can give you good contributions and rebounds, give you a little bit of blocks and steals, be a solid, efficient shooter from deep. Again, more in that off-ball role, but give you those contributions and then let other players succeed in their roles is a player who's very valuable. And I think Taylor Hendricks has a chance to show that this season and solidify himself as one of those, not like key players, but players that will just impact winning basketball and then always get minutes because of that. Going, what I would say is a little deeper is the last player we'll touch on here with the Jazz and Cody Williams, who many people thought would show more than he did last season. But frankly, he was one of the worst players in the NBA last season, one of the most damaging players on the court, kind of alongside with Isaiah Collier, actually, funnily enough. And Cody Williams is someone he showed more in summer league, more drive, a little bit more in preseason, getting downhill, better finishing, and actually doing stuff on the court. That's one reason I'm not as high on Cody Williams is that he actually just doesn't do stuff on the court, whether it's actually taking shots or getting boards or steals or blocks. He just doesn't do any of that. And normally, if you're not doing that, it's normally not a good sign for your playing career. And Cody Williams is young. He will improve, but his starting point is so low that even just he needs to improve pretty fast and pretty dramatically for him to become a NBA rotation player and a player that we can believe in for fantasy. I was already lower on him his rookie season. I am lower on him now, and he needs to improve quite a bit for that perspective to change some. Let's shift from the Utah Jazz now to the Denver Nuggets. Obviously, a team on the other end of the spectrum in terms of rebuilding versus contending for championships. We'll touch on Nikola Jokic pretty quickly here. He is awesome. He is going to be awesome for a few more seasons at the very least. And it's just, he's just awesome. Contributes positively in every category for fantasy, even upped his three-point volume last year. What more is there to say about Nikola Jokic? He is my best player in the NBA. He is my top fantasy player right now. I would take him number one in redraft without hesitation. And he's in pretty much my second tier of Dynasty after Wembanyama, and he headlines that tier because of just the full-fledged contribution you get from Nikola Jokic. And if you have him on Dynasty, you have a pillar for your team. Let's move to the other pillar of the Denver Nuggets in Jamal Murray. And I know he's been frustrating as a player the past couple seasons, But it's mainly been the early season struggles that mask actually a lot of consistency from Jamal Murray. He's played at least 60 games on average the past few seasons, while he's put up solid numbers, again, on season averages. And I think most notably, over the last 3 seasons, he's averaged at least six assists in each of those seasons, while being an efficient scorer, while adding some threes, some points, some other goodies across the board. I mean, that's just rock solid production. I think Murray does get, oh, he's not a 35% max player like he's getting paid. Or is this 35 or 30? It might be 30%. He is not worth that full contract, but I do think he gets a little bit of a bad rap when he is just, I think, a very rock solid fantasy option and has been. And you should treat him as such for fantasy. Let's move to newcomer Cameron Johnson here, who the Nuggets traded away Michael Porter Jr. and brought in Cam Johnson. Some people call this more of a salary dump. I actually think, yes, the Nuggets have been known to make a lot of salary dump moves, but I actually think this was part salary dump, but also part player improvement. Cameron Johnson can actually do something off the dribble. He can actually attack a closeout and make a pass. And we saw that development from him the past 2 seasons, but more so last season, where he actually took on extra usage on the Brooklyn Nets and not only upped his scoring, but stayed decently efficient while doing so, and even adding some passing into his game. Now it's probably scary, especially in Dynasty, to buy in on a 29, 30-year-old player who's had injury issues, who is coming off a career year on a tanking team, now going to a contending team. That kind of hits a lot of notes of a typical sell high. But I actually think Cameron Johnson could actually surpass last season's production because he's playing off a better team, playing off better players, while still having a similar opportunity to create and just be able to attack in the same actions that he was last season. So I wouldn't actually be looking to move off Cameron Johnson. I would just be looking to hold and enjoy that fantasy production. Aaron Gordon is the other forward here. Now, I think his minutes might get managed a little bit just because of some of the nagging injuries we've seen from him. But overall, I think we know what to expect from him, and that should just maintain for a few seasons, especially as he has this massive contract extension kicking in next season. The other locked-in starter here is Christian Braun, who has been a fantastic running mate next to Nikola Jokic, one of the most effective finishers at the basket, more in terms of volume than accuracy, but he just finds ways to get open on cuts. And of course, Nikola Jokic is going to find him on those cuts. They've kind of had a little bit of this mind meld, and Braun has excelled in that role. The question going forward for Christian Braun is, can he expand his usage? Can he up his threes? Because his three-point rate is actually pretty suspect. It's about, I believe, 4.5 threes per 100 possessions, which is that's pretty solidly below average. Can he expand those threes, just get up more shots, and maybe take on more usage and passing? I'm very skeptical if that's in his game. And this makes Christian Braun more of a reliable jack-of-all-trades fantasy player with some strengths in field goal percentage, more so than some impactful wing. But we'll see. Maybe he does take additional steps in his game that I'm not projecting. Moving on to some of the rotation options here. Jonas Valanciunas is now the backup center. I think he'll see, his 15 minutes per game, maybe more, and just provide a nice dosage of backup big man stats. Nothing wrong with that. The one I'm most intrigued by here, in kind of this front court rotation, though, is Daron Holmes II, who I've talked about a lot. Very tantalizing skill set with the ability to shoot, kind of a little bit like Filipowski, who we talked about earlier. Daron Holmes II has enough mobility, not not great mobility. I'm not going to call him a positive wing defender, but I think he has enough to survive out there. Knows how to just get his hands on the ball for some blocks, some steals. We've seen some of that shooting volume increase. We've seen him be a scorer, seen some passing. It's just a question, can he put it all together and show that he can actually survive on the NBA court? It does seem like from local beat reporting that Daron Holmes will actually start in the G League, which a little bit of sadness here. So don't be surprised if he is in the G League to start, and it takes him some time to actually push Peyton Watson or push Jonas Valanciunas for playtime. But I'd still be willing to stash and wait him out. It seems like the Nuggets are showing a lot of patience with Daron Holmes. Understandable with him coming off the Achilles injury and just wanting to see him ramp up against kind of that lower level competition in the G League. And speaking of Peyton Watson, I mean, it sounds like his role will be fairly solidified on this team in that backup rotation role we've seen. Now, I know Peyton Watson is fun for those blocks, fun for those athletic volleyball spike blocks, but his offense is just not at a point where I want him playing more minutes. And there's a reason that he isn't playing more minutes than he has. Maybe with the new coach and David Adelman, Watson does get more of a chance. At this point, heading into his fourth season, you're going to have to show it to me. You're going to have to show that you actually have more to your offensive game before I buy into you as more than being this kind of more 15 minutes per game curio. And I think that's more of what he is now. Moving on to the rest of the rotation options here, it's kind of a hodgepodge of guards who maybe add some shooting or maybe don't. You have Julian Strawther, who had some impressive scoring moments, both just kind of driving to the basket and shooting from deep, namely notably in the playoffs. But he is so inconsistent on offense, and he is a tire fire on defense. So the question is, can Strawther show that consistency? I mean, obviously he'll get a chance, but I think in terms of fantasy, you are looking at more just this points and threes player than something more than that. If you're a contending team looking for some deep veteran help, you have to look at both Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown. Obviously, Bruce Brown was on the Nuggets when they won their championship. Very important bench piece for them. Now, a few years removed from that, obviously he's not going to be the same player, but I think he will be that guard off the bench, add a little bit more playmaking, give you maybe a little bit of assists, a little bit of rebounding. That's all that you can expect here from Bruce Brown at this stage in his career. And Tim Hardaway Jr., a willing bomber from deep. Accuracy be damned. He will shoot it, but you're going to get very iffy field goal percentage. And then if he's hitting these threes, you'll get some explosion games from Tim Hardaway Jr. You're not going to get consistency from him. Jalen Pickett, to me, is more of a solid third guard, more than a guard you want consistently in your rotation. So I'm not expecting too much there from Jalen Pickett. And then Zeke Naji, I actually thought had some decent defensive moments last season. But that said, he's not someone I would be buying into long-term at all. And that's pretty much your Denver Nuggets. I think they'll obviously be a fun team to watch, as you are when you have Nikola Jokic. And really, I think you're expecting more of the same and seeing if some of these role players can just up their roles and their contributions a little bit more than what we've seen. Let's go now to the Portland Trailblazers. And I was so just heartbroken, distraught when I saw that Scoot Henderson had that hamstring injury, because I really thought he was poised to be starting, take on that larger usage and playmaking role, and show, hey, I am here, I am still very talented, and I can do more. But with that hamstring injury, he's not going to be playing for a few months. And then even when he returns, I expect it to be an injury that's going to linger. And I wouldn't panic if Henderson returns and he looks slow to return, a little slow to ramp up, a little bit behind the pace of play, because that's what happens when you're coming off that sort of injury and then coming in mid-season at that. So if Henderson does start slow, I wouldn't panic if I roster him. But at the same time, I don't think you're going to get this proper evaluation year yet again for Scoot Henderson. It just makes it really hard to buy into him. And he is obviously dropping down because there's still murkiness over what exactly does Scoot Henderson do for you on the court or for fantasy. So with that idea, who is actually going to lead the offensive charge here for the Portland Trailblazers? I think it will be some combination of Shaedon Sharpe and Deni Avdija. And I think both will have plenty of opportunity to show increased offensive creation skills. Via FanDuel, they are both, both plus 600 odds via FanDuel to win most improved player, which is tied for fourth best. So clearly the markets are pricing in the chance for improvement here from both Shaedon Sharpe and Deni Avdija. Shaedon Sharpe, I think there's someone that they really would like to take the next step here. He's already displayed, I think, pretty solid self-creation scoring numbers. But the issue with Sharpe is, can he add that passing game or can he up that volume of threes? Neither are elements that I think are natural instincts for Shaedon Sharpe. Prefers to kind of work more in that mid-range and be strong there or get to the basket. I think he will push his game out a little bit further to that three-point line and increase those volume of threes. But what I would really like to see more is Sharpe improve the passing game and passing instincts. I just don't know if that's fully going to get there. But if Sharpe can up that scoring to 20-plus points per game on solid efficiency, I think that will go quite a long way to solidify his dynasty standing. And talking about Deni Avdija here. Look, there's been noise that maybe he won't start, and people are like, oh my gosh, you're not starting like your second or third best player or even best player, Deni Avdija. What are the Blazers doing? Look, Deni Avdija, even if not starting, is still going to play at least 30-plus minutes a game. Even if he's not the nominal starter, he is going to play plenty. Don't be worried if he's not starting. It's not a big deal, and it's not really indicative of anything long term. And I think the Blazers know what they have in Deni Avdija as a strong downhill driver, a force attacking the basket, finding kickouts, finding those passes once he helps collapse the defense. And we saw him excel in the second half of last season. I think we'll continue to see that growth. My only slight concern for Avdija from a dynasty and fantasy perspective is that he's not necessarily the greatest defensive contributor, nor does he really give you a lot of shooting from deep. But you look at the rebounding numbers that are extremely strong for his position. You look at the assist and the assist percentage, which has increased every season he's been in the league. Yeah, you look at a player who can give you great points, good rebounds, solid passing. It's obviously a great player to have as part of your dynasty roster. Jrue Holiday, kind of your veteran guard here. Some might say, oh, well, of course, Jrue Holiday is going to take up that usage for it. I'm not sold on that because, yes, he's been on the Celtics, so he didn't need to play make as much. But I also think he didn't play make as much because he's just not as good as it. And I think all indications are that Holiday will be more of almost an off-ball wing on this team, both on defense and offense, and thus won't actually see that much of an increase to his usage and be more of still kind of a secondary or third option more than stepping up in that primary creation role. Rounding out the rest of the forwards here, we have to look at Toumani Camara next, who is one of the best perimeter lockdown wings in the NBA, leading to some nice steals and just helping create chaos on the defensive end. And I love players who do that. Do I love them for dynasty or fantasy? It depends on what else they're doing. And that's what I want to see from Tumani Kamara. Can Tumani Kamara expand his shooting? Can he up that shooting volume even further? Can he actually finish well at the basket? Or can he maybe just pass a little bit better or attack a closeout in a more consistent manner? That's what I'm looking for Tumani Kamara to do this season. It can just do one of those things, whether it's increase that shooting volume, increase the finishing, or be able to attack a closeout. Just give me a little bit more breadth of production here than just the steals and just more some threes. Give me at least average threes from your position, and I'm going to buy in on more. I'm going to buy more in on Tumani Kamara. Obviously, Jeremy Grant is still here on that big contract that he signed a few seasons ago. I think one of my favorite stats from last season is that Jeremy Grant took more threes per twos last season, which is kind of I just wouldn't have expected that from Jeremy Grant, and it signals how much his game has changed from being more of this inside out scorer to he kind of just shoots threes and that's it. If you need threes, sure, look at Jeremy Grant, but he really isn't doing anything else for you in Dynasty or Fantasy anymore. Okay, we talked about a lot about the wings and the guards here. Gotta look at centers now and look at Donovan Clingan first. Had a very impressive rookie season, already announcing himself as, I think, one of those top drop big defensive big man with his defense around the rim and with just enough mobility to survive out in switch systems too. And the defense is going to give him this innate floor. And because he will see minutes because of that. That's already, I think, locked in. Get those blocks, you'll get those rebounds because of those secure minutes. What we need to see from Donovan Clingan, though, to expand from a nice defensive center to this more all-round center is better finishing at the basket and more dynamism on the offensive end. I had some people say, why are you lower on Clingan on his offense? Like, do you know ball mark? Are you watching the film? And I actually would say, yeah, you know what? My takes on Donovan Clingan as a prospect and that his offense lacked dynamism and he wasn't actually that great of a finisher, borne out perfectly in his rookie season. Donovan Clingan was not a good finisher for a center and for the shots he was getting. And it's not just, he got some putbacks and couldn't finish those amongst traffic. It's just the ability to go up and finish a lob. They're not the greatest sweeper without a head of steam. Has a lack of just even mobility or shiftiness with inside the arc to finish two-pointers that effectively off the pick and roll. And while I do appreciate his passing vision, it is very much from a static position, not as much dynamic as you'd like to see. And I want to see Clingan build on those elements to have a better offensive floor and then really say, hey, I can play these 30-plus minutes a game and give you all the production that comes from that. I think Clingan has that potential in him. By all counts, he's been working on the stamina and working on those other elements of his game. And if he can become a two-way force, he could start pushing into the top 50 of Dynasty rankings. Behind him at center, some people are excited by Jan Hansen. I think he's going to need a good amount of seasoning. And he will probably have a chance to enter the rotation early on, but it could be very spotty minutes if he's not showing consistency on defense. And some of that might be dependent on the health of Robert Williams III, where there is a clear backup role at center on this team, but you cannot trust Williams' health anymore at this point of his career. So even if Robert Williams is out, I don't know if Jan Hansen's going to be ready day one, which means you're maybe looking at Duop Reith for some spot minutes here and there at center. Otherwise, maybe Matisse Thybulle gives his typical defensive goodies. Sidi Sissoko, I've liked his defense, but he is just completely woeful on offense. Blake Wesley is actually develop into a very solid perimeter defensive player. But on offense, no shooting, bad finishing, can get to the rim okay, but doesn't really do much once there. So it's kind of weird with the Blazers in that they are actually, I know some have called them a deep team, but for me, they're actually a very solidified top 7/8 in their rotation. And it's actually kind of a lot more question marks past that, which means they're their top 7 players. You can look at Drew Holiday, Denny Avdia, Jeremy Grant, Tumani Kamara, Donovan Clingan, Shaden Sharp, and Scoot Henderson. I think all those players are going to see plenty of minutes, and then the other players see more spot minutes to fill in the gaps. And I'm very interested to see if this team can actually build out some sort of competent offense, or if Avdia and Sharp struggle to take those next steps forward. Let's move to the Oklahoma City Thunder, the reigning champions Oklahoma City Thunder. Do we even need to talk much about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Don't really think so. He is in his prime. We know what to expect. And that's, it kind of keeps my analysis pretty simple there for SGA. Jalen Williams does look likely to probably start the season injured here with that wrist surgery. We'll touch a little bit on him. What I want to see from him is just continue to expand his offensive game, give a little bit more usage and a little bit more playmaking, and really be a force in those categories more than nice value adds in the categories. And I think the same can be said for Chet Holmgren. We saw some of his offensive struggles in the finals against Miles Turner, where Holmgren was just not able to finish well at the basket, wasn't really getting anywhere too positive with his dribble. And he doesn't have to have these offensive elements to be an impactful fantasy player, as we've clearly seen the past couple seasons. But it sure would be nice if he can take that next step, just do a little bit more off the dribble, open up his passing game a little bit more, and start pushing 20 points per game and pushing those threes a little more. And I think he will do that this season. But that's what I'm looking for from Chet Holmgren. Next to him in the backcourt, you have Isaiah Hartenstein, rather the front court. But I guess both these players are kind of also important in their passing game. And Hartenstein really is actually a key piece on not only defense, but offense for the Thunder. I don't think it's hyperbole to say he might be the second best passer on this team. And they got to treat him as such, running a lot of actions through the high post, through Isaiah Hartenstein, and let him either take that one dribble or find that bounce pass on a cutter, or just play off SGA or Jalen Williams in the handoff game. I don't think Hartenstein's role is really going to diminish any. He had nearly 4 assists a game last season, and that starts adding up pretty quickly for your center spot. He does only have 1 year left on his contract before that team option comes into play, where I do anticipate the Thunder moving on and Hartenstein moving teams, but he's clearly solidified his role as a positive value-add starter in the NBA. Looking at the rest of the starters here, Lu Dort's going to be Lu Dort, become a fairly reliable shooter, and obviously a great defender, and will get minutes wherever he plays because of that. Alex Caruso will continue to have his minutes managed, give you some steals, but yeah, they don't need to push him in the regular season, which does cap just how much he can do for your dynasty teams, which sad from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, I get it from an NBA perspective, and I do appreciate that the Thunder are doing that. And we saw him be the terror he can be in the playoffs. Again, not helpful for dynasty or fantasy, but I think we all understand why the Thunder are doing it. So let's look at Cason Wallace here, who is obviously a bulldog defender, just a havoc wrecker, havoc creator on defense, racking up steals while also stonewalling opposing guards. And the overarching question for Cason Wallace here is just how high is the ceiling actually for him? We haven't necessarily seen the Thunder task him with many offensive creation duties, mainly being more of a spot-up shooter. And I'm not entirely sure. This is a chicken and egg situation of Casey Wallace. Are the Thunder not tasking him because they don't need Casey Wallace to do this pick and roll playmaking? Or are they not tasking him with those duties because maybe he actually isn't the best dribbler and space generator or passer? I kind of lean. I think it's both there. I don't think Casey Wallace has this untapped upside in playmaking, but I think there's a little bit more there to tap into than how the Thunder are using him. You can obviously go either way with that. Maybe we see Casey Wallace take that additional step this year, especially with Jalen Williams out early. I just don't know if I buy into that. And if Casey Wallace is more of this threes and steals contributor with some assists here and there, that is an inherent limiter for what your upside can truly be if you are not garnering a good amount of usage. Maybe a player who steps up there is actually AJ Mitchell, who second round pick last year stepped up and helped provide that additional playmaking. It seems like everyone around OKC is excited to see AJ Mitchell step up his game even more. And I was a little lower on him last season, but I'm talking to some others. I'm starting to get a little more convinced of his upside and talent as a scorer and a creator. So, yeah, let's see if he can step up even more so. It obviously helps that Nikola Topic will be out a few weeks with a groin injury, which very unfortunate for him. Nikola Topic is a player I have waxed poetically about many times, but kind of similar to Scoot Henderson, when you're coming off an injury a couple weeks in the season, take some time to ramp up, and it's hard to tell if he will enter the rotation right away or if we're going to be left waiting a little bit longer to see if he can actually be something in the NBA. My suspicion is that we're going to be left waiting a little bit longer for Nikola Topic here. Aaron Wiggins is an interesting player. I think he is just an efficient rotation scorer. Had some real explosions with both the shooting and the downhill driving. Now his defense isn't that great, and Wiggins may just be an efficient scorer with field goal percentage and from free throws and some points. But I think as a depth piece, you could do a lot worse than that. And I think Wiggins has proved himself at the NBA level on multiple occasions. Isaiah Joe is kind of similar in that regard, but more the three-point shooter version. So, if you want points, efficient points, you can look at Aaron Wiggins. If you do want more bench depth threes, give Isaiah Joe a look. If you're looking to add those to your squads. When I talked about the bigs earlier, I forgot to talk about the big Jalen Williams, who, again, is one of these players who can just contribute a little bit of defense, a little bit of steals, a little bit of blocks, a little bit of passing. And clearly that was on display last year when he racked up some triple doubles on the team. And, if you look at the rotation in terms of the bigs, it's Chet Holmgren, Isaiah Hartenstein, and no one else is really a big here. So Jalen Williams is that third big on the team, should have a nice role, and should be, again, pretty good for this season, I think, in terms of production. Long term, I do question his role a little bit with Thomas Sorber, who I loved in this year's draft class. Sadly, he is out with that ACL injury, and I do have some concerns with a big who already had some ankle injuries and now has an ACL on top of that. I still think he's a good stash, just not as high of a stash as I thought previously. I think Thomas Sorber's return next year may push Jalen Williams, the big's role, a little bit into question, but it's probably going to be more of a work in progress for Thomas Sorber, which makes Jalen Williams decently trustworthy in the meantime. Lastly, if you are looking for a depth piece that could emerge, I would definitely give Brooks Barnhizer a look. In college, he was more of a do-it-all point wing sort of player. I do think his shooting's a little muted and the scoring is going to be a little hard to come by, but he can excel in other ways, namely the defense and just being a connected passer. Which, hey, if you can do that and do that well enough and earn minutes for the price that you're paying for Brooks Barnheiser, getting that return is actually pretty solid. And so if you're looking for more of a depth stash or a pick in the later ranges of the second round of the drafts, being more your deeper leagues, more of the 40s or 50s, Brooks Barnheiser is a name you can look for. Let's finish here with the Minnesota Timberwolves. We're getting a little long here, but I love the Thunder and Wolves last because they're a little simpler teams to talk about here. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is the guy on this team, but it was great for fantasy that he just decided to be one of the best pull-up three shooters in the league, which I don't think anyone saw coming. And that whole he shot so well on pull-ups last year that there probably will be some natural regression, but he can obviously be a massive influencer in that three-point category and points. But can he do more and namely add to that playmaking? I mean, he's really hovered around 4.5, 5 assists per game in the past couple seasons. And I'm becoming skeptical if he is that sort of player who can really pass and lead the offense in that regard, or if he is more of just this dynamite scorer. And I kind of lean more to know if that playmaking is going to improve. Look at Julius Randle next. Now he has his solidified 3-year contract. He's on a pretty good role as the second primary creator here. That's going to lead to plenty of points, rebounds, assists, and I think we can trust Julius Randle's role for the next 2 or 3 seasons. Rudy Gobert will continue to do his thing, but the offense does continue to decline even more as he ages, which means you get less points, less field goal attempts, and less field goal percentage impact. Yes, you're not rostering Rudy Gobert necessarily for his points impact, but it is getting to a point where it's like, oh, okay, like, can you just be nice if you can give me a little bit more in those categories? But at his age, you can't expect it to change anymore. Naz Reid will continue to be this tweener big. In a way, his 5-year contract extension solidifies his role as the first big off the bench in that 6-man role for this team. But because Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle are still on this team, it also caps Reid's upside, and that he's never, I don't want to say never going to start. He's never going to see 32 plus minutes a game, I think, because of the other players on this roster. And nor do I think he's necessarily solidified that role or earned that great of a role either. It's a long way of saying I think for the next few seasons, you should expect exactly what we've seen from Naz Reid. We know how this front court rotation works, and I think the Wolves are very comfortable with Naz Reid as a 26 to 28 minutes per game player with some fluctuations depending on the matchup or how players are playing that night. Joan Beringer is waiting in the wings, and I do like him as your classic rim-running defensive big, but I'm very doubtful he sees minutes this season. He's going to take a couple years of polishing and seasoning. Very clearly seems like the Rudy Gobert replacement, but again, that's a 2 to 3 year stash, and I don't think you should expect anything sooner than that from Joan Beringer. And the same goes for Roko Sikorsky, who's basically Beringer, but just worse. Sikorsky is even more of a lumbering big man. I do just like him for his inherent size and his behemoth status out there, but he needs a lot of work on both ends of the court before he even touches the NBA court. Looking at the other starters here, Jaden McDaniels did expand his rebounding and scoring game a little bit last season. I'm just worried that the usage isn't going to be there fully. He is a little capped in that regard. Maybe we see the rebounding improvements hold. The usage still feels more like a hope than something we should project in. And just keep Jaden Daniels pushed down a little bit in Dynasty rankings. Mike Conley is probably going to start here, but I mean, how much can he really give you and how many minutes can he give you on a nightly basis? And because the answer to that question is no, you have to look at Dante DiVincenzo to step up further. Had a little bit of a rough introduction to Minnesota last season, and then as it seemed he was starting to figure things out and get more comfortable there, injury hit him. And he returned nicely after that, though. I think we see a little bit of a bounce back from Dante DiVincenzo here, and he probably closes most games, which gives him a nice minutes floor. And if he does return to form a little bit, I think you'll see a nice season from Dante DiVincenzo compared to last season. Further down in that point guard depth chart, though, can Rob Dillingham actually earn minutes this season? I still like a lot of what we saw in the short burst from Dillingham last season. But yeah, I do have to question if he's going to play, if he's going to be too small on the defensive end. I still like the passing and the pull-up jumper and the dynamism on offense. But yeah, it's unclear if he is going to play all too much this season, unfortunately, as someone who was a big fan of his. Looking at the rest of the wing rotation now, the Wolves lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the offseason, which does open up minutes in the rotation. I think Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to get first crack at those minutes. As we saw last season, kind of this more energy wing, high flyer in transition will give defensive effort, give you some rebounds and just some easy baskets at the rim. But that shooting is still a little bit suspect. You have to question if he's going to give you, if he's just going to be more of a depth guy for fantasy or something more. Granted, him being a depth guy for fantasy is still really beneficial. If you're talking a player deeper on your roster, I don't know if he will elevate past that, but maybe if he improves that shot and keeps working on that, then he can elevate kind of similar, maybe surpass Nickeil Alexander a little bit because he has that drive game in his bag. Jalen Clark would be kind of the pure defensive wing version, where his offense is pretty suspect overall, but his defense is actually really impressively good. He even got put in as a defensive specialist sometimes against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and actually played him extremely well. There was a game last season when the Wolves played the Thunder, and Jalen Clark was put in at the end of the game specifically to stop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from getting a game-winning jumper, and Clark defended it masterfully. But I think the offense is going to limit him too much to really see too much of a role. Going now to the bottom of the depth chart, Leonard Miller is not even a dream, not even a daydream at this point. It just seems like things didn't work out for him. Maybe he hits the court, but yeah, I mean, the Wolves have seemed pretty loath to play him, and I don't think it's going to change this season. If you're looking for a really, really deep stash, though, I look at Enrique Freeman, who is kind of plays more like an undersized big / energy forward type and gets a ton of boards, a ton of offensive rebounds, even finds his way for blocks and steals. But the shooting is so suspect that it gives him not a great role in the offensive end. And he's one of those players that's hard to slot in because of that. Maybe he breaks through into the rotation as just more of a bigger forward for them that that the Minnesota Wolves can use. But that's more, I'll admit, it's more of a hope based on me liking him in his draft class rather than more because I've seen some indicators that he should be able to slot in. But if he does get minutes, I think you will like the fantasy production that comes with that. And that's what we'll leave it on this episode of the Punt Intended podcast. Again, I know we still have 2 more divisions, and I know the NBA season starts tomorrow. We are going to get through those. We will detail things that we have seen early on in the season for dynasty purposes. We'll get into all that in the future episodes. So make sure to look out for that. Make sure you listen into next week's episode, as we'll talk a little bit about opening games and then continue out this Division Dynasty series. Yeah, well, and we'll leave it there here. We'll see you next time on the Punt Intended podcast presented by FanDuel.